Wow. I mean, I've heard nothing but horror stories about closed species. I've heard nothing but bad.
I've always disliked closed species. And it's
so sought after that people will spend hours in bidding wars and will shell out months worth of wages just to get their grubby little paws on.
It only goes to show how unoriginal most of the closed species crowds designed are in the first place.
Hey, what up, it's your boy Nick. So closed species are one of the few issues that exist almost exclusively to the fandom, and it's probably one of the most divisive issues up there, up with mersuiting, baby furs, and putting locks on fursuits. The concept is a character whose design can only be obtained through giveaways, paid make-your-own slots, or adoptables. The traits they have are listed, with some being rarer or less common than others that may raise value of the adopts sold with them. Characters and owners get registered to reduce theft and to know who belongs to who. If you want to change your design, you may have to get admin approval or even pay with real money or digital money. The main gripes about closed species are the idea that they're gatekeeping communities known for selling what many would consider unoriginal characters for exuberant prices and witch hunting those who make knockoffs. My goal is to start a conversation and see different perspectives, not to make people think exactly like I do, so without further ado, let's get into it. So there are dozens of videos denouncing closed species in some capacity, and from them and talking with the community, I made a general list of bullet points on why people most commonly despise them, and anything that I did miss can probably still be answered with these responses. First point is they are effortless. You can say this about any adoptable or anyone's art ever. The idea that digital art is easier than traditional, or fursuit makers that use head bases aren't real makers. This argument takes many forms for all scenarios. It takes a team of moderators, well-established ones, to run events, often in unpaid positions, creating scripts, monthly and weekly prompts, and even NPCs for the community to interact with while pumping out original art for things like custom items and background pieces for lore. Some run off of separate websites and make customized layouts for those to engage with. Open species do this as well, but just like volunteer-run conventions like AntherCon, it's so easily taken for granted the amount that goes into passion projects like these, and people write off efforts that they mostly don't see. Do all groups have this dynamic? No. But certainly the ones that foster the best communities will often see the most success, whether they're open or closed. Some can find notoriety simply by having a unique art style that you can only see come from them. This leads to many valuing their closed species, similar to how most do with fursuit makers of an iconic style that go on to sell for thousands. Next up is they encourage witch hunting. This is a common debate throughout content creation on whether creators should be held accountable for the actions of their followers. A good portion of closed species in some way disavow witch hunting. The majority happens outside their spaces from individuals who take it upon themselves to harass those who considered rule breakers or knockoffs. Majorly, it's gonna be like 13 and 14-year-olds that are just like rage baiting on the internet. Witch hunting, however, is not unique to closed species. Artists will frequently have public blacklists of people who don't abide by TOS, scammers, and people that you generally just should avoid. But even then, we will see their own followers go forward and attack anyone on their blacklist unprompted. The elitism that people generally ascribe to closed species owners is one that I really don't see happen. People who go out of their way to flaunt on others should be taken as a reflection of that entire community. Next up is they're unoriginal and don't deserve the notoriety. I want you to imagine telling an artist that their adopt is unoriginal because it's a dog. That's essentially what's happening here. People pretend to be outraged with the exclusionary nature, but how many shrimp fursuits do you actually see in the fandom? What are the chances that one would look exactly like a fluffy shrimp by complete and utter happenstance? Slim to none, but we will find half a dozen knockoffs specifically replicating Mochiri's style. Art theft is never okay, but it's okay if it's a closed species, I guess. And I know there will be half a dozen people commenting on like the one or two instances they saw a person with a shrimp persona, like it negates my entire argument, like the said couldn't be said for literally every uncommon species. Like for instance, squid personas are not all that common. I'd venture to say there's less than 50, if not less than 10 in the entire fandom. But if a closed species came out that was based off squid, people would lose their minds, and so many of them would go out of their way to make squid personas like this political statement. Now, there will always be people that think making knockoff characters of these concepts is the coolest and quirkiest thing that they can do, but it's just kind of sad showcasing how unoriginal that person ends up being. You had millions of species, canines, felines, avians, arthropods, and millions of themes that you could have chosen, but instead you went out of your way to imitate imitate a concept and brand yourself proudly as a knockoff just to garner attention. 95% of the time, these people are so proud in boasting and thrive off the negative attention that they try to receive. It's this childish mindset of, I'm gonna buy a gas stove to own the libs. It's a thought process that most people should grow out of at some point, but others just develop this like fetish for being the center of controversy online, and it's really evident.
That's what it is for me, a matter of respect. If someone creates a species and you look at it and decide, I'm gonna copy this because I can, then you're just being an asshole at that point. Like, it's literally like copying someone's OC just because you can. Like, of course you can. Anyone could just draw what they want to draw, I guess. But the question isn't whether or not you can, but rather whether or not you should. It's a matter of respecting someone's right to have their own ideas and be recognized for that.
You had every opportunity to make your own original design, but chose to believe you're this martyr of the art community. There are something to the tune of 2 million species of animals in the world, and infinite possibilities of combining them with themes and concepts, with different styles and ways that you can create them. But people want to be hung up on someone made a little community combining dogs with water. I don't think it can be argued in good faith that there would be nearly as many people yearning for Jackson's chameleons if chameleons didn't make people pine for what they feel is excluded to them. And yes, to the half-dozen people who feel compelled to champion themselves as the mayor of creativity because they have a Jackson's chameleon and had zero inspiration from chameleons, like, yes, I see you, you're valid, good for you. But a lot of people also try to dumb down even chameleons or other species as just being the base elements. People will say chameleons are just these little green lizards, ignoring the mass amounts of creativity we see pouring out of them. Next up is they are restrictive. Piggybacking off the previous point, this is simply the most common argument against closed species, ignoring the fact that all the owners of these species do so of their own volition and completely aware of the rules and regulations of that group. But generally speaking, you can think of closed species community like cute group chats engaging in an RPG. You generally start with a basic character and then you work your way to growing through participating in monthly events, trading art for currency, and even winning lotteries similar to Neopets. The functionality makes it so everyone is generally on an even playing field, because if all traits were completely unlocked from the start, who wouldn't want to have the rarest species ever simply because they can? And I'll acknowledge that because of DeviantArt's increasingly dysfunctional UI, these groups are now kind of opting for Discord, but many end up actually just having to forego all functionality in these ways. Now, not all groups are like this. Some literally are just adoptables, and members love them all the same. The idea of having a closed species guideline only to allow for certain traits is gatekeeping isn't just short-sighted, it's blatantly wrong. In fact, this is easily seen across the fandom as most people's personas are dogs. Are there exceptions? Yes, duh. It's not a sick burn to say there's exceptions to a standard, but in general, the majority of animals in the fandom are commonplace, whereas unique ones often have an incredibly hard time selling. I completely welcome the idea, however, of limitations or rules because it forces artists to think laterally. It forces you to think about design, coloration, outfits, accessories, lore. It forces a person to put way more intention behind their design to stand out amongst the crowd that all have the same rules for character design. Anyone can slap wings on a dog, but limitations give a challenge often welcome to showcase how creative you can really be.
Not all closed species are like this. In fact, there's a ton of cool and original closed species out there with interesting lore, unique worlds, and cool design traits. In my honest opinion, if your species is so widely varied with possible traits to the point of where people can basically make a regular-ass dog and slap the species name onto it, I don't think it's a good species.
The next point is that you have to pay for additions and you cannot change what it looks like without approval. I cannot stress this enough. If you do not like closed species, you do not have to buy them. So many people who are upset with closed species are essentially arguing the vague telephoned complaint that someone else has about them. There are plenty of videos where people just rattle on about paywalling and the audacity of artists, then go on to buy Sims expansion packs. You don't need video games any more than you need a furry character, but people only seem to be upset with the latter. In general, people don't like the downloadable content nature of it, and that changes require admin approval. The consensus is it's your character and you should be able to do what you want with it at any given time, and that's fine. There are groups that allow you to do that. But it makes sense if you think about it, because if you could swap back and forth on character designs, people might just start selling them under the table or randomly adding rare traits to inflate the value of their character and sell it for way more than what they bought it for. A practice that's usually discouraged in the artist community. But this falls on the previous point where you have to put far more deliberation and thought into a design. Many groups, sooner than money, will let you pay by creating artwork for other members for a in-universe currency, which I think is really fun. It's sort of like grinding in a video game, an aspect that many people enjoy, while some do find it tedious and would sooner pay to avoid it. You can claim that they're unoriginal and that anyone can do them, and that's fine. But it also comes into question occasionally, how probable is it that you would accidentally imitate Mochiri Works' style and character qualities all in one go? Of course, there are some close species that are very common with very general traits, but they all do end up coexisting. Water dogs and other translucent species like bay foxes both have their own communities and people enjoy them for independent reasons. Next up is the argument that they are greedy. So Spockter released a video comparing close species to NFTs, and I want to preface. On a surface level, sure, I think it's true. If NFTs had no environmental impact and you're comfortable pretending that a $200 artist-made adopt is the same thing as a $300,000 piece of generated material stolen from other artists, then sure. You'd also have to ignore the fact that closed species are legit artists and guest artists, where crypto bros and NFT collectors are, well, typically the kind of people willing to rug pull millions of dollars from working class people and funnel advertising into money laundering scams. So yes, I suppose if you're comfortable comparing the two, then sure, there are similarities. But anyway, I feel like the argument that they're greedy falls apart the second it's applied to an individual artist, fursuit maker, or content creator. Are there species that seem to be simpler than most, and that some don't value as much at a glance? Sure, but can't that be said for all artist creations? We see people being attacked for their animations costing $400, or their sketch pages costing more than $25. Big surprise, people complain about art prices no matter what. A similar issue I see is people who make Pokemon or Poke Fusion adopts. They frequently get chastised for selling them because, quote-unquote, anyone can make a Poke Fusion. But can't the same be said for literally every dog ever? And the final point on this is I think people far overestimate the money that artists rake in every day. I still firmly believe that the art community is extremely pro-artist, but exceedingly anti-money. It is a weird contradiction that I find truer every day. We're at a point where people are asking to charge royalties on fursuits made with their adopts, which one could argue is legally fair, but logistically questionable considering most makers barely make minimum wage. Now the final argument is, why can't they just be open? They would be so much more popular if they would, and it would be so much better for the community. Well, why can't fursuits be cheaper? Why can't things be how I want them to be? And why do people beyond me have autonomy to make decisions that they think are in their best interest and often have a fun time doing so? Because it takes an immense amount of time and effort to run a community, host events, polls, and make species charts. Even if the group doesn't do any of that and you desperately want one, but you don't think the artist should be paid the wage that they're asking for, that is what we call in the industry as a you problem. The question is better phrased as, why don't I have ready access to something I don't even want? If an artist created a group chat for all the adopts they created, that is essentially a closed species group. You could claim they're gatekeeping for not letting you copy their characters, and that you had to pay to be a part of it. We celebrate a fursuit being sold for $50,000, but scoff at a creator making a community based on concept, based on a world that they built all their own, and have the audacity to charge money for their own adopts. In that way, it's not much different than a fursuit maker having a group chat for those who own their suits. Is it arguable that that's exclusionary as well? It's no secret that closed species have a perceived higher worth because of their scarcity of design, not even taking into account the quality of the art or the notoriety of the artist. But at the same time, All art has a perceived amount of scarcity and value that can make it seem way more costly even if it isn't. Sellers do this all the time. Black Friday fursuit sales, only 50 pins available for pre-order. The list goes on. It's only bad when closed species do it. Most people that are effective at compartmentalizing issues understand the concept of not caring, especially when they aren't hurting anyone. So in conclusion, overall, if you haven't been listening this whole time, there are basically 3 main reasons why people hate closed species. Number 1 is jealousy or envy. This could mean simply wanting one and can't get one, or wish that their art might be able to sell for as much and thus projecting insecurities onto the group itself. This is usually fostered by minors who don't have the disposable income to afford adopts, or the same people who would argue that fursuits are too expensive. Number 2 is white knighting for the perception that they're in some way unfair. Usually this is projecting their own self-imposed benevolence by saying how they would do things better, how they would run a group, and be such a kind and caring closed species owner by literally dismantling everything that makes the group what it is. White knights also often try to represent people who have had a negative experience or using their own negative experience to simply disagree with the concept even if they have never owned one. Most people arguing that closed species are bad usually only have inputs from the loud groups protesting them sooner than the vast and silent majority who either enjoy them or don't care. Even the concept of me saying I think that they're cool, I know will immediately be refuted because it's so uncommon, even if at a base level we both agree. And 3, the main reason, and I think the biggest reason of them all, the internet loves having things that they can mutually dislike. Some things are funny to dunk on, like James Corden or Amy Schumer. But taking one person and using it to define the whole is something that we've fought against for years. I don't think shaming artists for the ability to thrive in a niche market is ethical. Whether it's something dumb like color palette adopts or mood board adopts, as long as it's not hurting anyone, why would I care? And if multiple people come to you and rant about how your art is too close to a closed species, chances are they're 13. And if a handful of 13-year-old trolls on the internet is enough to completely enrage you and just loosen all your strings, maybe learn how to use the block button instead of painting the entire group as just angry 13-year-olds. People who buy, sell, and make closed species make things that in some way people enjoy, and by happenstance got their group to grow. Saying someone is just in it for the money is something you could say about literally every content ever. People will act like all the things that I listed are exclusive problems to closed species, as though Lagovert didn't make a video describing the drama behind circles. Drama is everywhere. Every community has their own. But villainizing an entire niche community over it essentially shows how easy we are to cannibalize our own community. So we need to be more introspective on what issues actually matter so we can deal with them and compartmentalize them effectively. But in the end, I think it's hypocritical to parade around that artists should feel free to express themselves and charge what they want, but in the same breath, berate a community that we don't even want any part of. I like closed species. Maybe I'm part of the minority, or maybe I'm part of the silent majority. But most people who do like closed species are often really afraid to say it because of how much vitriol gets rained down upon them immediately. I don't think it's unfair to say that the people who own and enjoy closed species get far more hate for enjoying those things than what we perceive them to put onto others. In any case, I know this opinion is not the popular one, and that's fine. But I know people like closed species, and I'm one of them. Honestly, they're kind of cool. If you don't like them, then you don't have to buy them. We talk about that all the time, but we forget it so quickly. Either way, what are your thoughts? Maybe I changed your mind, maybe I didn't, and that's alright. Your opinion is just as valid, but as always, remember, criticize the bad, showcase the good, and remember, for the love of God, please, keep it simple.